Hello, early modern philosophy students. It's Friday, Good Friday, April 10. Um, Today I will start out, as is my custom with these online lectures, I will start out by addressing some of the short assignments, some of them. I'll address some of them that I received this morning, in which students raised problems for, discussed, raised questions about Hume's writing from section 10 of the Enquiry, where Hume talks about miracles and the belief in miracles. I will also be talking about Hume section 12. You guys should have received my outline on Hume section 12. Perhaps you could look at that outline while I walk through some of the important ideas covered in there. And before I get into those things, let me just, by way of reminder to you all, let me point out that you guys should start reading Immanuel Kant's Prolegomena to Any Future Metaphysics. I will be talking about that on Monday. I'm going to want you to read roughly the first 20 pages of the Prolegomena. That will cover the preface and the preamble to the Prolegomena. I'll send you an outline for that soon. And also Group C. Group C students, you guys will owe me a short assignment that will be due early Monday morning. Those short assignments from Group C, I'll want you to explain some aspect of Hume section 12 and raise a question or problem for what he's saying. Also, everybody will owe me a term paper 1 week from today, Friday, April 17 at 3 o'clock. My plan is to get those term papers next Friday, read them all, put comments on them, give them back to you. You will then have opportunity to make revision to those papers. But of course, if you are making revision, I will average the score of the revised version against the score of the original version. So it's really in your interest to try and write the best paper you can for next Friday for the term paper. Also, I'll be getting you guys, I haven't given you any Hume study questions, but I will be getting you study questions to help you prepare for the final exam. Final exam will obviously be some sort of take-home exam. I'll probably have you answering, maybe 3 multi-part essay questions that will be similar to what we see on the study guide questions. I'll probably expect you to give some sort of textual support for the things that you're saying about such figures as Berkeley, Hume, and Kant. But anyway, keep in mind that that final exam, it will just cover the works by Berkeley, Hume, and Kant. I've already given you guys the Berkeley study questions. I do owe you guys some Hume study questions. And we'll be getting into Kant's views on epistemology and metaphysics starting next Monday. Also, a week from today, I will not be posting a lecture, and nobody will have a short assignment due a week from today because I'm assuming you guys will be busy working on those term papers. Well, let's go to some of the things that were written about Hume's section on miracles. I think maybe I'll start with something that Autumn Klein said in her short assignment, and she raised an issue that strikes me as very similar to an issue that Caleb Rigdon raised in his short assignment. And I apologize now. I think Laura Naide, you, and Zach Morris, while you had some interesting things to say, I'm just going to hold off from talking about your short assignments. Here's something that Autumn Klein wrote in her short assignment. I think I'll just sort of present Autumn Klein's point and then present Rigdon's and then try and respond to both of them because what they say strikes me as so similar. But Autumn Klein writes, and I quote from Autumn Klein, and before I do this, maybe I'll just walk through Hume's argument regarding miracles. Autumn Klein has it nicely outlined in her short assignment. So what was Hume saying? What was the central argument of Hume? Klein has it outlined in her own essay. Hume argues that, look, wise or reasonable people form beliefs in accordance with evidence. Belief in the laws of nature have as much evidence in their support as any belief can have, because they articulate causal laws which are founded on uniform experience of constantly conjoined events. Miracles are violations of laws of nature, right? Raising dead people back to life, healing the blind by the mere laying on of hands, walking on water, things like this. These are violations of laws of nature, right? Well, right. If wise or reasonable people form beliefs based on evidence, if laws of nature are founded on the most sort of complete evidence of constantly conjoined events, and if miracles are violations of laws of nature, then no one could ever have adequate evidence that a miracle has occurred. So no one could ever reasonably believe that a miracle has occurred, and nobody would ever reasonably accept another person's testimony or claims of miraculous events. Now, Autumn Klein maintains that there is a flaw within David Hume's argument about miracles. Klein points out that in a previous section of the Enquiry, David Hume discusses causation and brings up the fact that the future is unpredictable. Miracles, in a way, are assumably very unlikely breaks within the causation pattern that generally have a positive outcome. So if David Hume accepts the fact that we cannot know the continued pattern of cause and effect, he cannot deny that miracles could happen. Let me go to, right, and so, what is Autumn Klein getting at? Autumn Klein is going back to, say, section 4 of Hume's Enquiry, where Hume argues that, look, all beliefs about causation are based on the presumption that the future will resemble the past, but there's no rational basis to believe that the future will resemble the past, because it's not definitionally true that the future will resemble the past, and we've got no empirical evidence of the future. And so Hume in section 4 seems to be suggesting that our beliefs on necessary connections, causal relations between events, is not rationally warranted because we have no empirical evidence of the future. And Autumn Klein seems to be suggesting that this should leave Hume open to the possibility of miracles. Right? For all we know, to make Zach Morris happy, when I release this pin now, right, while we all expect it to fall, it might be that when I release it now, it just hovers there in the air, miraculously hovering there without, falling down. In section 4 of the Enquiry, it looks like Hume saying that we should be open to the possibility that there be such violations of the laws of natures. Right? Look, it strikes me. I want to respond on behalf of Hume here, but let's go to Caleb Rigdon. Rigdon, I think, is on to a similar point. Rigdon writes, and I quote from Caleb Rigdon, "A miracle as defined by Hume is a violation of the natural laws. Natural laws such as permanent death and the pin falling are matters of fact as Hume defines them. We think the pin will fall the next time it is dropped because every time in the past we saw the pin fall to the ground. Matters of fact are irrationally believed to remain the same," says Hume, "because we have no empirical evidence that the future will continue on similar to the past. Our past experiences help us to assume the way things will continue to be, but this hinges that the world will continue to act in the way that it always has. Hume cannot make the argument that past experiences help to make future assumptions and then write off miracles of violations of law. How can he tell the difference between a miracle and what may just be something different from the past?" Right? I think Rigdon is really pushing, and maybe I'm confused, but it really seems to be the same point that Autumn Klein is pushing. Again, Rigdon, like Klein, seems to be pointing out that Hume's claim or suggestion that we could never reasonably believe that a miracle has occurred, Hume's claim here seems to run afoul of what he's arguing in section 4 of the Enquiry. In section 4, Hume seems to leave open the possibility that at some point in the future, objects will defy gravitational law, right? Hume seems to leave open the possibility that the next time I release the pin, instead of its falling, the pin will hover in the air. Or maybe in the future, somebody will be dead for 6 months and then come back to life, or something like this. So So, and it seems to me, Autumn Klein and Caleb Rigdon would want to say that Hume should be open to the possibility that one could rationally believe that a miracle has occurred. Because after all, Hume leaves open, in section 4 of the inquiry, seems to leave open the possibility that events will not always proceed in the future as they have in the past. So what can be said in defense of Hume here? What can be said? I guess what I want to say is something like this. I think that Hume, given what he says in section 4, I think that Hume has to leave open. I think Hume, given what he says in section 4, I think he has to leave open that it is indeed possible that in the future things that we take to be natural laws may be violated. So in the future, even though we've seen it repeatedly and repeatedly on the planet Earth, that objects are released into the air and they fall. Objects are released into the air and they fall on planet Earth. Even though we have repeatedly see that over and over again, Hume has to leave open, given what he says in section 4, that it's always possible that on my next release of the pen, instead of its falling, it shall just hover there in the air. Or we have to leave open the possibility that John Lamos might be able to jump into the air and just remain hovering in the air and not come back down. I think he has to leave that open as possible. But then the question is, could one ever reasonably believe that what Hume acknowledges to be a possibility in section 4, could anyone ever reasonably believe that these possibilities will be realized? And Hume wants to say no. So while it's possible that on my next release of the pen will just hover in the air, one couldn't reasonably believe that this will happen, and one could not reasonably believe that such a thing has ever happened. Because again, Hume's view is that the reasonable person bases his beliefs on the evidence. Okay? And given our repeated experience of the constant conjunction between things being released and they're falling, right? The sun rising every day, when repeated experience of people dying and never coming back to life. This gives us reason to believe that these things will continue on into the future. Now you might say, you might push back and say, but Hume says that there's no rational basis for assuming that things will continue on in the future. And in a certain sense, it is. In a certain sense, Hume does want to say it's not rational. But once you get past section 4 and you get into section 5 and 7 of the inquiry, Hume says that, look, you got to keep in mind that Hume says that, look, it is human nature to expect the future to carry on in ways that it has in the past, right? And it is human nature when we see certain sorts of events constantly conjoined with other events. It is human nature to expect, given those constant conjunctions in our experience, to expect the future to carry on as it has in the past. It's human nature to believe in these causal relations. And Hume goes on, and the language of sections 5 and 7 suggests that Hume thinks that it is a good thing that we have this instinctual forming of beliefs that cannot be given rational justification. But there's a sense in which I think Hume comes off as a kind of pragmatist. It's practically rational for us to engage in this instinctive prediction of how the future will be after repeated experience of constantly conjoined events like the releasings of objects into the air and the earth and their falling, people dying and not coming back to life. And so I think what Hume wants to say that the wise and rational person is practically rational in believing in these necessary connections between things that he has or she has seen constantly conjoined in past experience. It's practically rational to believe this. And failure to believe in these necessary connections is dangerous to human beings. Right? It helps us survive by believing in what comes natural to us, to instinctively believe in necessary connections between events that we've seen constantly conjoined in our experience. And while we can't give a good argument that the future will resemble the past, we all nonetheless instinctively believe the future will resemble the past when we've observed constantly conjoined events in past experience. And we should believe in these necessary connections because it helps us get on in the world. And so no reasonable person, on Hume's view, would ever believe that a miracle has occurred and would never believe that testimony supports belief in miracles, because again, it's always going to be more likely that the report of the miracle is a product of deception or misunderstanding of what was perceived, or a product of hallucination, etc. So, that's my response. And I'm glad that Caleb and Autumn bring this point up. It's a point that students of Hume, and I've been teaching this many years, it's a point that students often bring up, that Hume's claims about miracles seem to contradict what he says in earlier parts of the Enquiry. And I've done my best to try and argue that if we pay more attention to sections 5 and 7, and sort of the pragmatic dimensions of Hume's philosophy, maybe Hume can be defended here. Let's look at something else. Dallas McFarland wrote something interesting here. Right? Dallas McFarland writes, and this is Dallas McFarland, he writes, what does David Hume make of different phenomena that occur naturally, unusual phenomena that occur naturally? McFarland notes that many things can occur naturally that would otherwise defy what we would normally believe to happen. He gives as example volcanic lightning occurs naturally, but occurs much differently than that of regular lightning. Like the causes of volcanic lightning are not the same as the causes of regular lightning. These stories and images are able to be found very easily, but still don't have much explanation behind them. If what we believe is based on our experience and miracles are things that defy the laws of nature, then how does one explain the happenings of these phenomena and their unnatural happenings? This is interesting. Dallas McFarland seems to be bringing up the point that there are unusual events that occur in nature. And I guess McFarland is suggesting that these unusual events, they don't seem to fit with the natural flow of our experience of the natural world. And McFarland seems to bring this up as, I take it, Dallas, that you're bringing this up as a potential problem for what Hume says regarding miracles. But let me just say, Dallas, it is true, and by the way, your example had me going to the web to look up volcanic lightning. I was like, what is this thing? And I found that interesting in itself. But that's another story. But Dallas, I think Hume will concede that there are unusual things that occur in nature. There are things, right? I think Hume would admit that, we do experience things sometimes that don't go with the normal flow of our past experience. I mean, I think Hume would admit that sometimes people have highly advanced stage 4 cancer, and yet they don't die. Sometimes lightning, I think Hume would admit, yes, I suppose, he might say, yeah, sometimes lightning is a result of causal factors that are not similar to most occurrences of lightning. But I think what Hume would want to say is that when these sorts of things occur, the person with advanced stage 4 cancer not dying, volcanic lightning occurring from causes that seem quite different from normal lightning. I think Hume would want to say we shouldn't think of those as miraculous. Rather, I think what Hume's going to say is that when these unusual things happen, like somebody with advanced stage 4 cancer surviving, or when you have volcanic lightning, or other unusual events occurring, Hume's view is that we should still expect there to be a natural scientific causal explanation for why these strange phenomena occur. There should still, right? And I think Hume would want to say we should still expect there to be a natural scientific explanation for these unusual phenomena. Because so often, anyway, according to Hume, when we go looking for natural scientific explanations for phenomena that we don't today understand, so often we do find the explanations, right? And I think Hume would say that these unusual events that we experience in the natural world, on Hume's view, we've got more reason to believe that these unusual events are still consistent with the natural laws, and that there is some natural scientific explanation for these unusual events. And it would be more reasonable to think that there's some hidden natural scientific explanation than to believe that these are genuine miracles that utterly defy any naturalistic explanation. It would be more reasonable to think that what's going on with these unusual events is that we don't currently know what the natural scientific explanation is, right? And that perhaps one day we'll find them. And that's a more reasonable posture to take regarding unusual natural events than to believe that they are the product of some sort of divine intervention in the natural order, where God is somehow violating the laws of nature to allow some bizarre event occur. McFarland, you bring up an interesting point. I definitely think so. And I'm giving you my Humean response. So that was, interesting. Let's talk about Daniel Kim. Kim makes a couple of points here. Daniel Kim writes, he writes, so there are a few objections to Hume's account on miracles. These are objections coming from Daniel Kim. Kim says, first, I believe for Hume to make this conclusion about miracles, that no one could ever reasonably believe that a miracle has occurred, right? Kim says, I believe for Hume to make this conclusion on miracles, he needs to make an account on why it is more reasonable to affirm the inexistence of God or some higher being. Because a lot of miraculous accounts are related in some way to God or some higher being. The possibility of the existence of God or some higher being makes it a reasonable possibility of miracles or violations of laws of nature to occur and be witnessed. So for Hume to say that it is more reasonable to dismiss every account of a miracle, he needs to demonstrate why it is more reasonable than that God or some higher being does not exist. I find that quite interesting, right? I take it what Daniel Kim is pushing is that, I think what Kim is pushing here is that before we go concluding that no one could ever reasonably believe that a miracle has occurred, Hume must first show that God does not exist. And I think what Kim is suggesting is that if somebody has a good reason to believe that God exists, if you had a good reason to believe that God exists, then it may also be reasonable to think that God sometimes intervenes in the natural world, allowing for miraculous events to occur. So if I've got evidence that God exists, or good reason to believe God exists, it would be reasonable for me to expect that God would sometimes intervene in the natural world, perhaps God giving evidence of his existence through miraculous interventions. So that's quite interesting. And at some level, I think that a very interesting philosopher of religion of the 20th century, Richard Swinburne, who's critical of Hume's views on miracles. I think Swinburne has made some points actually that are somewhat similar to this. Let me just say something here, though, okay? In defense of Hume, after Hume died, his famous dialogues concerning natural religion, those were published. And in Hume's dialogues concerning natural religion, Hume subjects he subjects to great critical scrutiny the various possible evidences of God. And Hume goes on the attack against many of these attempts to defend the rationality of faith. And frankly, I think in section 12 of Hume's Enquiry, Hume also expresses skepticism about providing any evidence of God's existence. And so, regardless, I mean, it seems to me that in other writings and in other pieces of Hume's work, Hume perhaps gives us the ammunition to argue that we cannot give good evidence of God's existence. And I think section 12 of the Enquiry, Daniel Kim, when you read section 12 all the way through and get to the end where Hume gives his critique of traditional metaphysics, which tries to establish the existence of God, Hume's going to say it can't be done. We can't know of God's existence because we cannot rationally justify the belief in God. So, maybe the evidence against God's existence comes in other aspects of Hume's writings, Daniel. So that's interesting. Kim, well, maybe I will stop here. I mean, Daniel Kim does make another interesting point, but I can see that on my iPhone here, it looks like I've been going on for 27 minutes here. I should hold off. Daniel Kim, I would love to talk with you about other things that you said in criticism of Hume on miracles. Let's hold off. Let me turn to section 12 because important things are going on there. And I should at least walk through that. And we'll talk some more about section 12 on Monday in response to student comments. Let's turn to section 12. I'd love to say more. I find Hume's discussion of miracles fascinating. Many philosophers do. Let's talk about Hume section 12. Clean the slate here. Look, in section 12, Hume wants to consider skepticism about the external world of material objects existing external to one's consciousness. He wants to deal with that issue. He also wants to talk about the epistemic status of what he calls traditional or school metaphysics. And I think section 12, it's very good that we cover section 12 and Hume's critique of traditional or school metaphysics because I think it's section 12 of Hume's Enquiry that really had quite a grip on Immanuel Kant's epistemology and metaphysics. In the reading for next time, we'll see Immanuel Kant saying that Hume's writings awoke him from his dogmatic slumbers regarding the nature of knowledge and metaphysics. And I think it's things that Hume says in section 12 that really play a significant role in awakening Kant from his famous dogmatic slumbers. But let's deal with Hume section 12. Look, Hume believes it is very difficult to give rational justification of our knowledge of a world of material objects existing external to our minds. Let me actually go to the text, because I often feel that Hume writes very eloquently on the problem of our knowing of. I think Hume writes very eloquently regarding the problem of our knowing of the existence of external material extended objects that correspond with our perceptions. Right now, I believe that there's a physical computer sitting in front of me. And I believe that because I have these very vivid impressions, these very vivid perceptions of a computer sitting in front of me. I believe that there's an iPhone over here to my right. Why do I believe that? That there's an extended material iPhone to my right, because I've got a very vivid impression of such a thing. But Hume thinks it's extremely difficult to to give a rational justification for belief in the existence of such extended material objects existing external to consciousness. And we've seen Descartes wrestle with this problem. We've seen Locke wrestle with it. We've seen Berkeley wrestle with it. In fact, Berkeley thinks the problem is so difficult that it's more reasonable to think that there are no extended material objects. Sure, there are iPhones on the Berkeley view, but they just exist as ideas in our mind and in the mind of God. Hume thinks this is a difficult problem. Hume writes, page 419, I'm looking about 20 lines from the bottom. Hume writes, "It seems evident that men are carried by a natural instinct to repose faith in their senses, and that without any reasoning, or even almost before the use of reason, we human beings always suppose an external universe which depends not on our perception, but would also exist though we and every sensible creature were absent or annihilated. Even the animal creation are governed by a like opinion, and preserve this belief of external objects in all their thoughts, designs, and actions." Just like human beings, when animals see material objects moving towards them, such as predators or trees falling towards them, animals presume that there is a material predator or tree and get out of the way. It seems also evident, says Hume, that when men follow this blind and powerful instinct of nature, they always suppose the very images presented by the senses to be the external objects, and never entertain any suspicion that the one are nothing but representations of the other. This very table, right, says Hume, which we see white and which we feel hard, is believed to exist independent of our perception, and to be something external to our mind which perceives it. Our presence bestows not being on it. Our absence does not annihilate the table. The table preserves its existence uniform and entire, independent of the situation of intelligent beings who perceive or contemplate it. Right? We all believe that the table will continue to exist when we leave the room. I believe my computer will continue to exist when I leave the room. Hume goes on and says, page 420, "But this universal and primary opinion of all men is soon destroyed by the slightest philosophy, which teaches us that nothing can ever be present to the mind but an image or perception, and that the senses are only the inlets through which these images are conveyed, without being able to produce any immediate intercourse between the mind and the object." This is Hume presenting that problem with Descartes and Berkeley and Locke wrestled with. All we have is access to our perceptions of reality. We don't have direct access to external material physical objects. So how do we really know that there are? And what really justifies the belief in the existence of external material objects that are the cause of our perceptions? Hume goes on, page 420, towards the bottom. He writes, "By what argument can it be proved that the perceptions of the mind must be caused by external objects entirely different from them, though resembling them, and could not arise either from the energy of the mind itself or from the suggestion of some invisible and unknown spirit," like in Berkeley, "or from some other cause still more unknown to us? It is acknowledged that, in fact, many of these perceptions arise not from anything external, as in dreams, madness, and other diseases. And nothing can be more inexplicable than the manner in which body should so operate upon mind as ever to convey an image of itself to a substance, supposed of so different and even contrary a nature. How can physical bodies impart to a non-physical mind images of that material reality? Asks Hume. Hume goes on, page 421. I know I'm quoting a lot, but this is very eloquently written and worth a second look. Hume says, it is a question of fact whether the perceptions of the senses be produced by external objects resembling them. How shall this question be answered? In other words, it is a matter of fact whether there are material objects external to my mind that cause my perceptions, right? And if that's a question of fact, well, then by experience, surely the question of whether there are external objects must be answered by experience, surely, as all other questions of a like nature. But here experience is and must be entirely silent, says David Hume. The mind has never anything present to it but the perceptions, and cannot possibly reach any experience of their connection with material objects. The supposition of such a connection is therefore without any foundation in reasoning. Look, what's Hume saying? Here's my outline, and you might want to take a look at it if you've got it available. Hume says it is a question of fact. It is a matter of fact whether there are material objects existing external to consciousness and corresponding to our perceptions. It's a matter of fact whether there is a computer causing my perception of the computer right now. That's a matter of fact. It's not a relation of ideas issue. All questions of fact are to be answered empirically, says Hume. But all that we ever have present to our minds are our own impressions and ideas. I don't have direct access to the physical computer. I only have my experience of the computer, which is, right, a relation, right, which is, right, my experience is just the having of certain impressions or ideas. No argument can show that there must be material objects existing external to us which correspond to and cause these impressions and ideas. Therefore, there is no rational justification for the belief in such a world of external material objects. Now, Descartes thought there was a rational justification. Descartes thought that we could rationally justify belief in external material objects because Descartes felt that if we have knowledge that there is a good and wise and loving and all-powerful creator, God would not deceive us in our beliefs about the existence of material reality, right? Hume considers that approach at page 421 of the text. Page 421. Hume writes, right after Hume points out, right, again, I repeat from Hume, the supposition of such a connection between material physical objects and our perceptions is therefore without any foundation in reasoning. He says that towards the top of page 421. But then he goes on next paragraph. He says, to have recourse to the veracity of the supreme being, God, in order to prove the veracity, the accuracy of our sense perception, is surely making a very unexpected circuit. If this veracity of the existence of God were at all concerned in this matter, our senses would be entirely infallible, because it is not possible that God can ever deceive. Not to mention that if the external world be once called in question, we shall be at a loss to find arguments by which we may prove the existence of that being or any of his attributes. This is Hume, considering the Cartesian attempt to solve the problem of the existence of external material objects. I take Hume, right, I've got on my outline, Hume considers the Cartesian attempt to give rational justification for belief in a world of material objects existing external to consciousness. But he says this approach fails. In support of this, he notes that, one, if God exists, then our senses should be infallible. And since our senses are not infallible, we have reason to believe that God does not exist. Look, if God exists and is all-powerful and all good, our senses shouldn't mislead us, but we find that they do mislead us. At least often they do. Second, to know that God exists would first require knowing that the external world exists, right? Thus, appealing to God's existence to solve the problem of the external world would beg the question, and thereby still fail to solve the problem. I think there's a hidden presumption at work in Descartes' in Hume's critique of the Cartesian solution. The hidden presumption is that Hume thinks that, look, the only way you're going to be able to prove the existence of a divine creator of the universe is by some sort of design argument or argument from contingency, where you've got the material world, and the material world could only exist if there is an almighty and all good creator. Right? And if that's the only way to reasonably argue for God, well, you're going to need to know about the existence of that material world to establish the existence of God. And so any way of arguing that God exists to justify belief in the evidence of our senses would require first knowing that the material world exists. Or so Hume pushes. Hume's got great skepticism about any a priori non-empirical arguments for God's existence, such as the ontological argument, right? And so, in the first part, right, there are 3 parts to section 12 of Hume's Enquiry. In the first part, Hume pushes that there is what he regards as a deep problem trying to give rational justification for knowledge knowledge of the existence of material objects existing external to consciousness that correspond with our perceptions of them. Now, in the second part, it seems to me Hume goes on to try and propose a solution to this problem, and I think Hume ends up waxing pragmatic here. Look, so Hume's solution from part 2 of section 12. Look, David Hume does not think we can give rational justification for belief in the external world in the manner of a René Descartes. Also, Hume's not willing to go the Berkeley route. I think he thinks that it's Berkeleyan idealism is crazy stuff. In the end, David Hume believes that the skeptical argument that we began with cannot be answered, but that in living our lives, we all will, nonetheless, continue to believe in material objects existing external to our consciousness, right? Hume's move here it's similar to his move regarding causation. We can't rationally justify belief in necessary connections, but the human mind just operates in such a way that we do believe in necessary connections. And Hume thinks it's a good thing we believe in those necessary connections. So too, the human mind is going to make us and lead us to believe in the existence of material objects corresponding to our perceptions. That's just how the mind operates. Is it rational? No. But is it practical? Yes. Should we continue to believe in material objects? Yes. Hume goes on, right? I mean, and again, I take Hume to be saying that our minds are just hardwired to believe in the existence of material objects that serve as the causes of our perceptions. And I quote from Hume. He says, "The great subverter of Pyrrhonism, in other words, excessive principles of skepticism, is action and employment and the occupations of common life." Look, when we're living our lives, we all believe, right? And when we're taking action, when we're cooking our meals, when we're securing food, when cars are barreling down on us, we believe in material objects and we respond as though they were material objects. And this justifies at some level, in some practical way, we're justified in believing in material objects because in living our lives, we all believe in this, and it's a good thing we believe in it. Hume goes on and says, and I quote from Hume, "Here is the chief and most confounding objection to skepticism about the external world, that no durable good can ever result from such skepticism. While it remains in its full force and vigor, this skepticism, all human life must perish, were the skeptic's principles, universally and steadily to prevail. Nature is always too strong for principle." At a certain level, I take Hume to be arguing, can we give a rational justification and the manner of a Descartes for belief in external material objects? No. Can we defeat the skeptic in rational argument? No. But Hume's point is that, look, we all are going to continue to believe in material objects, and we should believe in them because it's crucial to our survival. I think I might have wanted to add something else here as well. There's a kind of impatience with skepticism on Hume's part, which I've always found somewhat amusing, and it reminds me of things that Locke says. Right? Maybe this was in my outline. Hume writes, on the contrary, the skeptic must, I'm looking at 426. On the contrary, the skeptic must acknowledge that if he will acknowledge anything, that all human life must perish, were his skeptical principles universally and steadily to prevail. All discourse, all action would immediately cease, and men remain in a total lethargy, till the necessities of nature, unsatisfied, put an end to their miserable existence. Right? In other words, Hume's saying, if you live in serious doubts about the existence of the external material world, you're going to die. And Hume goes on and says, I quote from Hume, it is true, so fatal an event is very little to be dreaded. And I take Hume to be suggesting it wouldn't be so bad if these skeptics were killed off anyway. Nature is always too strong for principle. Look. So, how should we respond to skeptical arguments that we cannot rationally justify belief in the existence of material objects existing external to consciousness? Well, we can't beat them in argument. We just got to say, look, it's human nature to believe in these material objects. When we have vivid perceptions of material objects, it's human nature to believe in them. And Hume is suggesting we should not stop believing in these material objects because we need to believe in these things to get on with our lives and to survive, etc. That's what I take Hume to be pushing here. Let's move over to a third part of section 12. Here Hume subjects what he calls traditional or school metaphysics to serious scrutiny, criticism. I'm looking at my outline. Hume says, he builds an argument like this. Well, let me go to my outline. He said, right, at the end of his book, David Hume makes a scathing critique of what he calls divinity or school metaphysics. Divinity or school metaphysics gives us arguments for the existence of God, tries to do things like prove the immortality of souls and other such things. Hume's argument, if I could put it into a nutshell, is as following. Point 1, he reminds us, all knowledge is either definitional relations of ideas knowledge, as found in mathematics and geometry, or matters of fact, like what we see in science, revealing truths about the existence and nature of things in the world. Hume says, look, divinity or school metaphysics makes claims of God's existence and the immortality of souls. Hume says, look, such claims are not relations of ideas. It's not definitionally true whether God exists or not. Right? It's not a definitional issue concerning God's existence. Rather, right? And it's not a definitional matter whether our souls are immortal. Claims of God's existence and the immortality of soul, those are matter-of-fact type claims. Hume says matters of fact can only be known through empirical evidence. We cannot empirically verify, we cannot give empirical evidence regarding metaphysical claims of God's existence or the immortality of souls. Therefore, this traditional or divinity or school metaphysics, it cannot yield knowledge. It's not home to knowledge, right? Hume goes further. Some of the things that he says here, they're pretty harsh. He's harshing on traditional or school metaphysics. He writes, and I quote towards the end of the Enquiry, quote, when we run over libraries, this is from the very last page of the Enquiry, quote, when we run over libraries persuaded of these principles, persuaded of the argument which I just rehearsed, when we run over the library persuaded of these principles, what havoc must we make? If we take in our hand any volume of divinity or school metaphysics, right? If we take in our hand any volume of divinity or school metaphysics, for instance, let us ask, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? Is it math or geometry? No. Does the book contain any experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact and existence? Is it a work of science? No. Commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and delusion. In other words, if some book or philosopher is passing off something as knowledge, and it ain't the kind of demonstrable, conceptual truth found in math or geometry or logic, or if it ain't empirically grounded science or history, then Hume's going to say, it's just bullshit. Well, that's Hume's Enquiry, section 12. Kant will have things to say about this. You guys have a good day. Stay safe. Have a good Easter weekend. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.